It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up, what's happening? Welcome in. It's a live edition of Take Command after the Commanders have wrapped up their spring program. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen. You made your way back.
Made my way back. Here we are.
We're in the bubble.
In the bubble, yeah. It's not too bad in here, actually.
It's not too bad. I've done a lot of talking in here the last couple of days.
Yeah, I was watching the podcast from afar, watching your show. However, you guys did that setup, you and Will, and you look very nice in here. It was with Kime. That's right, with Kime.
Yeah, Kime. We were sitting on that side of the table.
Yeah.
This is actually the table.
Yeah, this is the same table.
This is the same table, but I've decided that I wanted the field behind us today instead of the white tarp.
Yeah, and these cool barriers.
Yeah. Which they put up to block so we couldn't see walkthrough and then never had walkthrough. That's a true story, boys and girls. Obviously, the offseason is over. We're going to talk about what we saw today, day 3 of minicamp, and we will talk about what Dan Quinn said afterwards. And I think, obviously, the biggest story, Logan, is Jaden Daniels continues to look really, really good. Dan Quinn afterwards declined to name him the starting quarterback, even though he was QB1 exclusively all 3 days of minicamp. And that was kind of my takeaway earlier in the week. I was kind of like, how many days in a row does he have to be QB1 before we say he's QB1? But they obviously can mix it up later on. And Marcus did have some days stacked earlier on in the spring. But I think if you look at the springs of the two quarterbacks, it would be kind of silly not to have Jaden Daniels be your starting quarterback because he was the better quarterback throughout the spring.
Yeah, I think part of it is just want to keep him motivated. I think that's really what it comes down to. It's just like, hey, man, we're still in a competition. We still want you to keep pushing. We still want you to keep kind of aspiring to that next level of production, especially at this level. Everyone's been talking about how he's here at 5:45. That's great, but does that wane? Does that focus deteriorate at all if you're not hungering and striving for something? So I think it's good. I think it's also you want to see how they perform, both guys, when it is a competition, when there's a little bit of pressure, and you can kind of simulate that as a coach, and they might in the building know something different. But I think all of this stuff, I know fans get really frustrated with it. I've had a lot of conversation with fans about it. And to me, it's appropriate. Like, keep them in a competition, keep them working at it, and keep the pressure up a little bit because you want to know, how the guy who's playing the most important position on the field for you handles pressure and handles a little bit of adversity. So
no doubt. And the other thing is you look at how they treated the process of drafting him, right? And Adam Peters is big on we don't make a decision until we have to make a decision, and there's no deadline because what happens if you name him the starter and then he has a really poor camp and Marcus turns it on in August and you're like, maybe this kid could use a couple of weeks here. You don't want to predetermine anything. So as unlikely as that feels right now based off the trajectory, there's no deadline, so why make a decision? With that said, if we look at just, instead of looking at it through the lens of evaluation to make a decision, look at it through the lens of just pure evaluation. Sure. What did you make of Jaden today? And I think one of the things that stood out to me was how he performed in the red zone. Because that is an area where the offense has struggled a little bit because it's hard to score down there. But he was excellent today in that period. Yeah,
I thought he looked really sharp. I think there was 2 kind of red zone-ish periods. One was a 7-on-7 and one was a team period. In the team period, to be fair to the defense, they were running a lot of man coverage, and so you could tell that was a point of emphasis for them. And by extension, Cliff Kingsbury's running a lot of man beaters and stuff that puts you defensively in a really hard spot. You're getting in tight bunches, you're getting 4-man overloads, you're shifting, you're motioning, you're challenging the communication. So I thought, obviously, in that period, Jaden looked really good. I thought there was a period where they were working a little bit more zone principle. B-Rob catches 2 passes up the seam. Love both of those play designs. You're just getting a 4 verts, but you're just getting into it with different personnel, different alignments, and great job by Jaden hitting those throws. But it did feel like the defense, I don't want to say it was some days we're saying, it's an offensive day or it's a defensive day. Today felt more of like an offensive day. It felt like we're working on our cover 2, we're working on our cover 3. We're not going to disguise a ton. We're working on our man coverage. And anytime as an offensive player you have you're running one of these 3 coverages, you can tell the difference. And other days that I've been out here earlier in the process, you kind of say, man, this coverage is really well disguised, or hey, this is quarters, and it looks like, man, they're stemming to quarters. Today was a lot, I'd say, much more straightforward, and I think the production was much better. But that's what you expect from a guy like Jaden Daniels. And again, that's not to take anything away from Jaden.
He's still got to make the throws,
Yeah.
and those throws to B-Rob up the seam are tough throws. They require some velocity to squeeze it over
And some
a guy
touch.
and to make sure that a safety crashing down can't get there in time. But also, like you said, the touch to get that arc, that trajectory just right, and he was tremendous. I also liked the stack of plays that Cliff used on the first of the 2 touchdowns. They were in, I think it was 11 personnel, and they were going hurry up, and they changed personnel. All of a sudden, they're in 22.
Yeah.
And the defense is kind of trying to find everyone
Yeah.
because you got tight ends split out. You got Austin Eckler going in motion as a wide receiver. B-Rob's in the backfield. All of a sudden, he sneaks up the seam. He's got a great matchup on the linebacker. So the use, you see it, and it's some of the stuff that we've wanted to see in the past from this offense, and we thought we would see a lot more of last year, is they have so many guys that are versatile. They have so many guys that can line up different places, and it very much seems like Cliff Kingsbury is intent on using them in those different places as opposed to a bunch of, hey, can't that guy do that we've had the last couple of years.
And I think there was, there's a fun element to play design. Like, when you watch a Kyle Shanahan offense, or when you watch, kind of the spread single wing that they're running down in Miami, or some of those concepts, or even when you see a good high school or college play that are all over Instagram and TikTok and all that stuff, there's something really sweet about it. Like, the timing's good, the motion hits just right, the spacing's good, the guys are distributing the field well, and I felt like with that 22 play you're talking about, the next play that they ran with 4 verts where they shifted to it, there was this crispness, which was so great. And they were just like, it was just like, oh, that was so well designed. That was so well executed. The timing was excellent. All of those things were just checked on the boxes. And I know it's early off season, and like I said, the defense was kind of in some simpler stuff today. But man, it's really hard to execute football plays like that. And to see that multiple times in a practice, from the quarterback to the receiver to the spacing of the concept, I thought was really cool. And so I came out of this practice being like, man, like, that's cool. That's good offensive coaching. That's good offensive enforcement, meaning like the details. Everyone's on their details. And I just was like, you got to tip your hat to Cliff after a day like today, because you can tell that group's coming together. And again, there's still a lot of work to do, obviously. But it was, I thought, a really nice kind of checking of the box in terms of schematically what they're doing.
No doubt. The other part of the quarterback discussion is Marcus Mariota. And I do think that part of my, like, hey, it really looks like Jaden Daniels already kind of won the starting job, is I don't think Marcus had a great spring. And, like, not that I expected Marcus Mariota to be incredible. Like, Marcus Mariota is Marcus Mariota, whatever that means. But there's some stuff from, like, a veteran nature that you would expect from him in terms of when they run some of the situational football, like him to be in control of the situations.
Yeah.
Or there was a play yesterday where it's actually the crazy Quan interception that you may have seen on Instagram.
Crazy play.
But, like, they heat him up.
Yeah.
And he lofts the ball out there, and Quan makes a hell of a play. But, like, it's the kind of play that you're like, really, as a quarterback in a game, because you just kind of there's no velocity, there's no urgency on the throw. You loft the ball over the middle of the field, like, and especially if DBs know that a blitz is on, they're going to be able to jump it. And so I do think that part of the equation is Daniels has been better, not just than we expected, but like Dan Quinn at the podium was like, he's been a little bit better than I expected.
Right.
And he fell in love with him and drafted him number 2.
Right.
But I do think Mariota he's been a great mentor, and they were hoping probably that he'd be a little bit more than just a great mentor.
No, I think that's right. And I think, we talked about it a little bit on the field today. There is a nervousness or a nervous energy, let's say that. Because I think, Marcus does some good things. He's made some nice throws. He's made some good plays. I'm not trying to distract from that anyway. But there is a kind of, when Jaden's out there, I think back to when I played with Matt Ryan. Like, Matt Ryan's feet are very active, but his eyes are very consistent. You can tell he is seeing what the defense is presenting. You can tell he's seeing the concept well. You can tell he's seeing the space well, and he's dictating to the defense. When Jaden's out there, there's shades of that. You know what I'm saying? He's not there all the way,
as you would expect.
But he understands, like, this is dead. I'm going to work to this progression, and my feet are going to take me there, and my eyes are going to take me there. That's very consistent. And when Marcus is out there, again, like, he's made some really nice plays. He had a really nice zone read today, which was awesome. But one of the things about him, his feet are never settled. His eyes are kind of all over the place, and I'm always questioning when I watch. Not always, but I find myself consistently questioning how well are you seeing the space and the concept, and that's not what starters do. To your point, and I think that's kind of what I'm getting at there. It's like, yes, can he play? Can he win you some games? Is he going to play a valuable role on this team if Jaden does get hurt? 100%. But I do think if you just look at the consistency that Jaden's brought every single day. In terms of the footwork, the vision, the manipulating of the defense, the understanding of the defense. It all the chips kind of lean in that direction. And to your point, like, those are starting caliber traits. Now, he's still young. We talked about how you want to keep that competition going. But I think when you just compare them one-to-one, it's like, who would I rather be starting for my team today? It's probably Jaden Daniels. But again, there's still a lot of time. You don't want to back yourself into a corner, all those things. But
right. And I think the fact that it is so definitive by June, what are we, in June 13th, and frankly it was definitive before June 13th, is noteworthy. I'll put it that way. Last piece of the quarterback discussion as we look ahead to training camp. I feel like I want to see, if you're if you're Dan Quinn and you're thinking, all right, what do we want to see from Daniels / how do we get him ready? Because really at that point it's about that, right? It's not about evaluation and testing. If I think a lot of us are, where it's like, it's pretty clear what direction we're going to wind up going here.
Yeah.
So how do we actually get him ready to play NFL football? I do want to see what happens when he's flustered. And I'm probably of course you want to go through installs. There's a lot of standard stuff that goes without saying, but just to make sure that people are not like, well, I'll say it. But you talk about days where the offense or the defense can win. If I'm Dan Quinn, at some point in August, I'm dialing up a day where he can't win.
Yeah.
And I want to see how he handles it, because he's so inflappable, which is a phenomenal trait. And if he continues to just be that on a day where he can't get anything going, which is because the deck is stacked against him, like, that just says it says so much about who he is and his competitive character, and I think he's got that in him. Like, I actually think it would be hard to fluster him.
Yeah, and I think they've done versions of that or periods of that. Like we talked about that. I think it was 3 or 4 practices ago now, where they had they did quarters in the low red, and in a 7-on-7 period, and basically the windows are like non-existent. There's nowhere to go with the football. You don't really have your quarters beaters up. The offense is still kind of in its early stages. The timing isn't there the same way that it was today, for example. So I say to myself, they've done that, and he's consistently just kind of bounced back. Whether it's within the practice or the next practice we get to see him. Like, again, he's made mistakes. He's had tough days. There's days like, for example, 2-3 practices ago, like when he misreads the coverage and kind of is a little unsettled, gets the ball out. He just seems to manage it really, really well. I think the thing that I want to see probably more than anything is the more 11-man football stuff. That's what I want to see, because one of the big knocks on him is he doesn't do well coming out of college, obviously, and I think there's degrees of this, but is how he does when it's not a super clean pocket, when he's being pressured, when the pocket's not super defined. Like, what does he look like? And one of the things about LSU's offensive line, there's definitely 2 draftable guys next year. One that's probably going to go in the first round, right? So that
might be
level,
a top 5 pick. Their left tackle.
That level of talent obviously isn't here in terms of offensive line, because it's nowhere in the NFL. Like, that's just a fact of life. So I think that's the thing I'm really excited to see when training camp comes around, is how in these joint practices, in the team blitz periods, does he stay in the pocket and deliver these footballs the way that you have to at the NFL level.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of the offensive line, I think that is probably the other most interesting thing for me from this week and this camp period in general, is the amount of rotation. I feel like every O-line coach that I've ever covered has been pretty consistent with their units. Like, guys will get day off, and so you get some cross-training here and there. Yeah. But the intentionality, I interviewed Daryl Tapp yesterday, and he talked about how everything Quinn does is intentional. Yeah. And the intentionality with which they moved guys around, and it's like, this is this guy for this day. Brandon Coleman yesterday at left tackle, Michael Dieters at left guard, but that feels more so that Nick Allegretti can cross-train at center with the twos. Trent Scott is a left tackle for some days. It's back to Cornelius Lucas today. The amount they move those guys around, as someone who played as an extension of the O-line as a tight end, like, at what point, like, you want to keep doing that. You want to make sure you're ready to have your best 5 on the field and that they're prepared, but you also do want to plan for some best-case scenario that you actually get to play the same 5 guys. How do you feel like they treat that once we get to August, and what kind of needs to happen there?
Honestly, I think it'll stay the same. When I was in Atlanta, like, the offensive line coach there was extremely deliberate about moving people around the front and just being like, because you never know. I think that's one of the things with the offensive line specifically. It's such a pivotal thing, and you need to make sure there's very little drop-off. So, like, can you play, and especially on game day, because you're probably only carrying 2 extra guys, a swing interior and a swing tackle. Like, can we make this amalgamation work if we have 2 injuries, right? So we don't have to put in a tight end and a tackle, for example. And so I think it's something that he's going to do quite a bit, and I think it's great that guys are moving around the front and getting some different reps, working different combinations. That's another thing. It's just so important to kind of build those relationships, not only with the top group, but like make sure that those rotational guys that could play a little bit can work with the top group. So I think it's something that is maybe a little bit unconventional, but I noticed it starting to happen probably in 17 maybe. They started doing it a lot more. Every team I was with, Houston would do it. Everyone was doing it because they understood the importance of the flexibility along the front. So I think this is a good thing. I think it's something that's kind of taking over the NFL a little bit more, and I think it's something that's extremely important. But to your point, at some point you got to find your best five. I think this is a good way to do it.
Yeah, because that's the thing is like you both want to build camaraderie and chemistry between an actual starting five group. And clearly, the best way to do that is to have them play together as much as possible. There's also just the reality of the NFL that if you get through 5 games with the same 5, like that seems like a miracle these days, especially at 100% of snaps, even if a guy misses 3-4 series. And I think that's something that has been a change, is not just like O-line coaches used to talk a lot about their best 5, but then if the left tackle went out, the backup tackle or backup left tackle would come in. You never would consider like, oh, maybe our left guard is our second best left tackle, and so let's move him out. And I think that's the thing that's interesting to me is like all of a sudden Nick Allegretti's playing center, and it's like, okay, if something were to happen to Tyler Biadasz, it's not necessarily going to be Ricky Stromberg, which, by the way, is an interesting conversation about Ricky Stromberg's future and Braden Daniels and some of these guys that are kind of, especially the recent draft picks that are going to find themselves on the fringes battling each other for spots on this roster. But, like, if Nick Allegretti's your backup center, okay, what's your backup guard situation? What does that look like? And the willingness to move pieces around, I think, is pretty fascinating. And I'm curious, like, it makes me wonder, like, does Sam Cosmi cross-train at right tackle at all? You know, does he get any reps back outside in August and things like that? No,
I think it'll be really interesting to watch. And, again, the Allegretti thing's awesome because, like, that way you can carry your best swing guard. You don't have to carry a guy that can snap, which is really important. You know, like if you're – especially when it comes time to make roster cuts, you don't want to be carrying a guy you don't think is as good because he can't snap. Like that is your swing interior player. You know, like Wes Schweitzer was a luxury in some ways because he could snap, he could play both guard spots. You know, let's say Chris as an example, Chris Paul. I don't know if he can play center, but I know he's pretty good at guard. Like he's serviceable at guard. So maybe you say, oh well, Chris is the guy we can keep, and Allegretti can bump to guard if we are in that situation where we're in a tough spot. So I think it just gives you the best opportunity to put the best 5 out there if there is some adversity to strike. You know, we've seen it with Cornelius Lucas, like how good he's been, like as a piece that can come in and just make you right at both right and left for a couple of games, which is awesome to have. So, and then in that example, maybe you say, oh, Wiley can maybe Wiley's our second best guard or whatever that looks like. So, I think it's just great to kind of see what guys can and can't do. Make sure guys also understand what the protections, understand the runs from a global standpoint, not just what I'm doing. I think it just helps with them learning the offense. So I think again, it's a little unusual, but I think it's a trend that's been sweeping the NFL because it does allow you, if something happens, to be like, hey, we're not beholden to this certain arrangement. We can make this happen. So
I think the other thing too, quickly with Allegretti, is we've talked about with rookie quarterback, you want a veteran center, and it's like if Stromberg's your backup. I know Dieter's played center as well, but Allegretti's a vet, and so if you want to keep that veteran center, that could be another tick in the hat of Nick Allegretti is a guy that you kick inside should something happen, knock on wood, to Tyler Biadasz. Defensive line, I think, is also interesting. Obviously, there's only so much you're going to take out of camp from the defensive line. But I was thinking about kind of that same thing after talking to Tapp yesterday and looking at the roster and thinking about the versatility and the way they play things. I really wonder how many guys they keep at each spot. And this will become clearer as we get into the August and then ultimately into early September. But because they will probably move some guys around more, I wonder if they maybe keep one less edge than we expect and another interior guy sticks around, where all of a sudden a guy like John Ridgway maybe is a little bit safer because they think he's just better than one of the edge guys or whatever it winds up being. But what is that of having Jamin playing on the edge, Luvu, like these guys that can rush in those situations? What kind of flexibility do you think that gives them, and what did you see from the D-line as much as one can at this time of year?
Yeah, well, first off, I think the thing that sticks out to me is they've been pretty straightforward. You know, one of the things about Dallas specifically is they, you know, again, that's the point of comparison, is they do a lot of really complicated stuff on third down in terms of stunts and movement and pressures, and that's where those kind of the Frankie Louvu's come into play because, technically he's a little by protection rules. He's not a big, but he rushes like a big. So you can put him in over the center and you force them to make certain protection calls. You can drop other guys into coverage. And so that's one thing I've noticed in training camp is they've kind of been in their vanilla cover 3, their vanilla cover 2, man coverage looks, some quarters obviously, but I'd say on the whole it's been pretty straightforward kind of early days of install, and I think you see the same thing with the defensive line. So I think that's something I'm excited to see once they get to training camp also, is just kind of ramping up the complexity so we can see, we've seen a little bit, you've talked about this a lot, is how they match personnel groupings in the back end. Hampton's in this play, Sanders was in this play, Chin's in here, right? They haven't done that as much with the defensive line, and I can't wait for them to start doing that because that's really the lifeblood of this defense. Is this is our pass rushing group. This is our this. This guy does this for us. He can drop. He can do whatever. So I think that's something that I'm kind of I've circled as hey, what does this look like as we get into joint practice, as we get into full 11-on-11 drill work, and how does that develop over the next early stages of early stages of training camp and preseason for that group specifically? Because like you said, there's other guys in there that have some flexibility, but we haven't seen them used in that way necessarily yet.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so the back end is kind of the last thing we'll talk about here, unless you have anything else, but we're also running out of position groups. So the back end, they so much mixing and matching, so many guys playing well, so many guys making plays. What do you take out of the complexity that they have shown? And maybe it's still simple coverages, but all the different personnel groups and all the things that they've been able to get done here in just a couple of weeks.
I think that's the thing. It's simple, but it's there's an illusion of complexity. It's good offense too, right? It's hey man, we looks like we're in man, but we're rolling to Tampa 2. Everyone runs Tampa 2, but we got to this disguise. We got from this disguise to this coverage in a very specific way, which is great to see. That's something that gets you excited, right? But again, it's not all of the stuff they've done. And the thing that makes the coverage work and be able to play those relatively straightforward coverages is the pressure packages. And what do those pressure packages look like? And that's, again, what I keep going back to. But with the secondary, specifically, I think it's just been great because of it's just such a different vibe. You know what I mean? In terms of communication, in terms of energy, in terms of competitiveness, that I think is great. For example, there was a call that the offense is in a 3-by-1, 3 receivers to the left, 1 receiver to the right, backs offset to the right, and Jeremy Chin's working through a communication call with Forbes, and it's we're gonna, what I'm gonna call is lock. Oh, we can't lock this. Oh, but we can lock it. Let's lock it. And Forbes it's like he's hanging on every word that Chin is saying. And eventually they get the lock, and it was late in the down, but they got it. They were on the same page. They were able to get it covered up on the backside. And that is cool to see because I remember going to practices 100 times last year and not seeing that level of communication, that level of emotion with regards to the communication. And I think it's just going to be that's the thing that I think elevates this group is can you communicate like that with all of those different people at the same time? So that's why, Kyle brought this up on his podcast. They've got the second string linebackers in with the first team secondary. I think it's just, again, working the drill in terms of communication. Those guys are going to have to play for you at some point this year, and let's get that lined up. So, and the other thing about the personnel groupings is it allows you the best opportunity to match what the offense is presenting every single time. And I think that's also cool. We got these guys that are, kind of without a position in terms of how you would traditionally classify them. Your Dominic Hamptons, your Tyler Owens, these big, long, rangy guys, but they understand how to use those pieces here, and that's also really cool. Jeremy Chin's another guy that fits in that same mold. So really, really cool, different personnels, different levels of disguise, different levels of communication, and it just, again, much like the offensive production today with Cliff Kingsbury was so high, that stuff is good foundational stuff, and I just want to see the house that they put on top of it to make them a great defense.
In my, is this 8 or 9 years doing this? I don't know, whatever. Since 2015. You can do the math. Being out here, or maybe you can't do the math. I can't. I have never seen / heard a defense talk like this. It is just a totally different. Now, I've covered some really bad defenses, but I've also covered some decent ones. Well, and I've just never seen a defense that communicates like this. And I think, obviously, it goes to the standard that they've set. Is this is how we do it. There is not an alternative. There is no other way. it's certainly some of the newer guys are at the center of that. But I also think you see the Quan Martins. You see some of the guys, Defoe, who have been here that certainly are hanging on the words of some of these veteran guys and some of these guys that are kind of setting this new standard, but are definitely also participating in it.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And, like when you talk to Smoot, for example, like he played with Greg Williams, and those were, say what you want about Greg Williams, off the field or whatever, but as a coach, great. And those defenses, according to Fred, communicated in the same way, right? Because as a defense, you are tasked with this impossible job of matching everything the offense can do from different numbers of receivers and different personnel sets. And so the only way you can do that, in my opinion, is to communicate and make sure that we're seeing it the same way and make sure that we're matching this the same way. We've ID'd this the same way. And I can't rely on, how many defensive backs are there? There's seven defensive backs in some looks, like linebackers included in that, to see every offensive formation the same way. So one way to kind of mitigate that is to be like, hey, Craig, this is how I see it, and I'm the boss. So you're going to see it the way I see it, and we're going to be on the same page. Yeah. And as long as we're on the same page, we can mitigate a lot of mistakes. Like how many times last year, as an example, not to pick on last year's defense or last year's coaching staff, but they just weren't on the same page. Guys were, they had inside help they thought they had inside help when they didn't have inside help. Like I think back to the Bears game where you get St. Juice trying to undercut a dig when he has no help over the top. That's so easily managed by saying, hey, Juice, I got you here. I've got the dig, right? Yeah. And just reminding him. And it's like, oh, yeah, great. You know what I'm saying? And back to work. And that happens on the offensive line. That happens with the tight ends, the fullbacks. And just that little extra communication ensures there's no errors. And I think it's great that you've pointed that out, because like when I talk to any London, Smoot, any defensive player that I ever played with, the communication, it's like we're not communicating the way we need to communicate. That ever since I've been covering the team. And so here it's kind of feels like the opposite, but I feel like this is the standard of defensive communication.
For sure. And I think to that, like, I'm the boss, I'm in charge. That's actually how the podcast runs. It's Logan's the boss, and I just do whatever Logan says.
You're the boss.
Yeah, well, we don't let people know that. But I talked to Defoe after practice yesterday, and I asked him about Bobby, and I was like, off the field first, what do you see? And he's like, the routine, all the stuff you'd expect. And I was like, on the field, like, what does he bring? And he's just like, he'll literally be like, watch out for this. Right. And just like the ability to read, react, but also recognize what's happening and the options that could be coming at you, and to alert guys to that. It's not necessarily directly saying, I'm the boss and this is how I see it. It's making sure that you have the same thoughts I do because I'm verbalizing them and putting them out there.
And I remember playing when I was a rookie, London Fletcher would do the same thing. He'd be like, hey, watch power, watch whatever. And it wasn't always right, but you could tell it got people, oh yeah, this is that formation, right? This is the formation where they do that out of. So let me kind of shift my alignment a little bit. And more often than not, he was right, or at least he was able to help the guys get in a position where they could be right. And I think just having someone not only at the first level, but Chin talks a ton, man. Yeah. He's talking his face off. And him and Luvu, and just getting that extra little bit of detail is so important, because I've coached defensive guys like in my personal training business, and one of the things that's like when you're watching film, it's like, oh, this formation, they're 60% this type of run, right? And especially if this motion and with this guy, with this guard tail, we're at 80%, right? And if I'm in the flow of the game and I'm trying to think about the call and where I align, it's just nice for someone to be like, hey man, remember we got tight zone out of this. And you're like, oh yeah, I can squeeze my alignment down a little bit because of this alignment. It's such a valuable piece. It's the same thing like when I was playing with Matt Ryan, and he'd be like, hey, Logan, watch 0 here. And you're like, oh, it is 0. Like, right, I missed it because I was thinking about a million other things, just to kind of focus up and be like, I got to do this in this protection, or run this type of route, or tell this receiver, I got to pick for this receiver. Like, it's just nice to have someone else like look out for you and be like, hey man, remember this? Yeah. Oh yeah, right, good, let's go get it. You know what I'm saying?
No, 100%. And that communication and being on the same page prevents a lot of bad stuff from happening on defense, and that is excellent. And hopefully carries over to the regular season, and hopefully it's not just relying on Bobby Wagner too. I mean, hopefully that's
well. The kind of thing you said this too, though. Like you've seen other guys start talking. Right. I like today Forbes in that look. He looked at Chin, and it wasn't like I'm waiting. It was like, what do we got? It was like I'm communicating with you for you to tell me.
Because what I was going to say is obviously Bobby's going to be the center of that, both positionally as the middle linebacker and because he's Bobby freaking Wagner. But the thing about as you know better than me in football, is you spend so much time in the meetings, right? And so if he's there in the meetings and he's able to be like, hey, this is what I'm looking at here, then you get other guys starting to think like that. And that's how you change.
It's not all on him.
The culture, right, of a team, and kind of how a guy's career can change trajectory because of his interaction with a coach or a player, because it changes your process and how you think differently. And that's really valuable. And that seems to have already started to happen, for sure. And, obviously they do have Bobby Wagner on the field, which is great, but you're seeing, and I'm sure Chim was like this in Carolina too, just a super smart guy, but you have those multiples. But it's also, I'll say this real quick to wrap up this thought is, that's the kind of thing that a guy like Adam Peters is looking for. Like it's a chicken and egg thing, right? It's like, they're doing this because DQ and the staff preach it and they make sure that they emphasize it and it's really important.
Such a great point.
But they also are bringing in guys that play that way and think that way and lead that way in the first place.
It's like when people say, we want tough physical football players, smart. You don't make tough physical smart football players. Like, you can help them along the way, but you need to find people that have that in them, that are of that same ilk, of same description. And I think that's what, as a talent evaluator, as I've done the draft stuff each and every year and got used to it, it's like, I like this guy, player X, but he doesn't fit this cultural identity. Like, he's not going to tackle the way they want. He's not going to fit the run the way they want. He's not going to be physical with the press the way they want, because that's not who he is. He's a good player, but he doesn't fit this. And I think that's one thing when I was in San Fran and talking with people about Adam, just generally, is they said he did such a great job of being like, this is what the coach wants to be. Let's make sure everyone I'm giving him fits that. You know what I'm saying? It's like, McCaffrey, for example. I'm sure a lot of people had varying different grades on him. But he's tough, he's smart, he's physical, and he's going to work his face off. And now you put a piece in here with a guy like Zach Ertz, and now you've got two people. And now maybe one of the young guys, Bryson Tremaine, sees how hard McCaffrey works and says, I can do that. Because I'm a tough, physical, smart guy, but I can take it to the next level. And then all of a sudden you've got 3 or 4 guys that operate in the same way because they are built the right way, if that makes sense. I think that's so important. Whenever you're doing your pre-draft stuff, your mock draft stuff at home, it's not about how good you think the guy is. It's like, do they fit the cultural identity of your organization? And like you said, Adam's done a great job of finding free agents and draft picks that fit that.
I want the guy at pick 100 who goes to pick number 2 and says, I hear you're showing up early. What time?
Yes.
5:45. And then he just starts showing up. Because apparently that's what went down. Like, he didn't say, hey, can I come?
Yeah.
Luke was like, what time do you show up? And Jaden's like 5:45. He's like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
And he's just here.
Well, and what's crazy is, like, they've done all these studies about the psychology of, building leadership. And it's not necessarily the first guy that does it, it's the second guy that does it.
Yeah.
Because it encourages other people to be like, oh, well, shoot, like, that's cool to do. I'm going to do that. And then all of a sudden that 2 becomes 4 and that 4 becomes 8.
Yeah.
And you've got a big chunk of the team out here learning.
I got a funny analogy for you. Back in high school when I was DJing weddings.
Love it. The dance thing.
Do you even know that I DJ'd weddings?
I did not know that.
But we used to say that.
Were you good at it? Let's talk.
Pretty solid.
Do you still DJ? You still got a kit and stuff?
No, I do have a kit. I did the music for our wedding.
Did you?
Yeah. I recorded it before we went over there.
Okay. I was going to say.
You can't bring your own DJ to Scotland. It's very expensive. We did bring our own photographers, but that was also expensive. We picked our spots. It's a wedding, man. Anyway, the point is, we would say, like, it takes 2 people to start the party and 1 person to end it.
Yes.
Because if we had 2 people out there, then it's kind of an open invitation for more people to go get on the dance floor. If one of them left, the other person was following, and now we got 0.
Yeah, right.
And that's literally what it is.
Yes, and I think that's so. Again, you get people of the right construction, and you get the stuff that you want. You get guys working together. You get guys communicating. You get guys staying to watch film. You get guys making each other better. And I think that's one of the reasons why this offseason in general has been so encouraging, is the process has been correct. Now, is it going to lead to wins in year 1? I don't know. Probably not. But, like, it'll lead
to more wins than it would if you didn't have it.
But it establishes a foundation, and then you get a San Francisco, and then you get a Detroit. Like, you do the hard things early and get the right people in here early, and then you get something really productive and good out of it. And I think that's the thing that you leave practice every day going, why am I so excited? I think that's one of the reasons why.
For sure. Anything else from either today specifically or the last couple weeks in general before we
Yeah,
we're not going anywhere for the summer. We're going to still do the podcast. But,
but there's no football stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think everyone probably wants to know about Brandon Coleman. I thought he had a better day today.
Oh yeah.
Thought he was much more consistent about setting the line. You saw him use his length. There was a couple, 3 or 4 practices ago where he was oversetting and kind of missing with his punch. Today he was much more consistent, and those are the types of steps you want to see. I had an issue, I made a correction, and now we're ready to go. And again, today was much more straight rush, like kind of 4 guys rushing the quarterback, as opposed to the day when I was here before, where it's like running games and stunts and ETs, and we're really challenging you. But answer the test that's given. I think that's good. And
I will say, yesterday when you weren't here, he was out moving a little bit.
He can run around a little bit.
Ooh, buddy, is he athletic?
He's got some light feet, especially in the individual stuff. You just see him kind of glide around. And again, whether he's a guard or tackle, left tackle, right tackle, we'll see. But that athletic profile and the stuff you hear about him as a guy, as a worker, it gives you hope that he can become more than the sum of the parts as of right now. Kind of like how McCaffrey is this, he's this work in progress, but he works so hard, he's going to be better, right? You kind of hope Coleman's the same way, and it gives you a lot of confidence in that pick potentially moving forward.
No doubt. All right, so if we got nothing else from practice, kind of means we're in ranking season. Oh, yeah. No, we'll have some other fun stuff coming as well. We do every year the divisional position rankings, which is really fun.
That is fun.
We have done that the past couple years, so we'll definitely do that maybe as early as next week. We got a couple other guests we got to follow up on, but always fun stuff that comes out this time of year. A lot of great writers drop a lot of great feature pieces. So like this was the time of year last year that Jordan dropped. It wasn't a feature piece, but she dropped the Play Caller series. So things like that we'll dive into for sure. Other than that, plenty of mailbags as well, so leave your comments
please.
On YouTube at Team980, at 1067 The Fan, at Craig Hoffman. You can send Logan messages on Instagram. You can tweet me. We've got plenty of ways. HoffmanShow.com, there's a contact page. Whatever tickles your fancy. We'll try to answer your mailbag questions. Until the next episode, which will be early next week, that's Logan Paulsen. I'm Craig Hoffman. Happy minicamp is over season, everybody.